Hey everybody, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. We're talking about the Best Picture nominees of 2021 in preparation for the ceremony later this year in about a month or so, in April.
Yeah.
And today we're talking about Sound of Metal from Darius Martyr, starring Riz Ahmed. It's mainly about Riz Ahmed. He plays the metal drummer Ruben, and some stuff happens to his ears. Now, last week, we talked about Judas and the Black Messiah, and we had a lot of interesting stuff to say about it. I highly recommend you go check out our discussion. But we didn't have any rankings to give it because it was the first film of our 2021 Best Pictures. So today we're going to figure out where they stack up against each other. And so let's begin by talking about The Sound of Metal. And I think this is a very powerful movie. I just want to say this. I'm a sound designer, and this movie, and I use my ears, and I really like all this like sound design. I wear headphones a lot. This movie was goddamn terrifying. It's so scary to me to watch what happens, and we'll talk about why. We'll not watch, to hear what happens, and I think we're gonna talk about it. And I'm just gonna lay it out there right now. If this movie does not win Best Sound Design, I'm gonna throw a fit. Because
it's not going to win. It's not going to win Best Sound Design. It's going to win Best
Sound. Well, okay,
that's right.
It's going to win the Sound Award.
Yeah.
If it doesn't win in that category,
they eliminated the separate sound design and sound mixing categories and combined that into Best Sound.
Yeah.
So,
but regardless of the categories, this film I think has the best sound of any that I've seen so far. But that's only one part of it. It's a pretty big part, and I think we should dive in deeper. But first, I want to hear your guys' thoughts after I step down from my bully pulpit.
Yeah, I think you really. I believe we're correct in opening this review with acknowledging the sound design of this film, because I think there are two stars. It's the sound design and it's Riz Ahmed, and that's going to be the bulk of our review. And they're both absolutely magnificent in this film. It's both of them, sort of. They very much immerse you. They bring home the emotional resonance of this film in separate but equally powerful ways, and I very, very much enjoyed this film.
I think Sound of Metal is staggeringly good. I really loved it. I think Riz Ahmed is incredible. I hate to say it and completely destroy any credibility I have on this program, but prior to this film, when I think Riz Ahmed, I think Rogue One. So I didn't have a lot of expectations.
Yeah, he is in Rogue One.
And so I didn't have a lot of familiarity with him, but he stunned me. His performance, it reminded me of watching Jake Gyllenhaal, the way that he becomes immersed in this role and just sells this character that I never would have expected a lot out of.
Funny, you bring up Jake Gyllenhaal. He was his co-star in Nightcrawler.
Yep. Oh my God, I love Nightcrawler. I forgot he was in that.
Yeah,
but
he's the assistant.
I think this film is incredible. I think that Timo's point about it being terrifying is true, because what's great about the film thematically, I think, is how applicable it is. There's a heart to this movie that is not so overt that it hits you over the head, but it's so powerful. I think the ending of this film is so powerful, and it brings its thematic material home. And I think that not a single second is wasted. It packs a punch. It's emotional, it's beautiful, and I hate to say it's my favorite movie of the year. So
interesting.
Whoa.
Very interesting.
Yeah. I've got to say that my basis of Riz Ahmed was not Rogue One. I totally forgot he was in that. I don't like Rogue One. It's kind of forgettable. But instead, he's the villain in Venom, which is where I was familiar with him from. But clearly, he has a much larger filmography that is, I think, a little bit smaller stuff. And this is, aside from those ones that we've talked about that are large franchise films, I think this will help him break into larger films and receive the recognition he deserves, because he really was fantastic. And Tanner's right in there being 2 stars, 2 hearts to this film, the sound design, and Riz Ahmed, because he is so central to the film in ways that not many main characters are. He just takes center stage for literally every aspect of it. And I think that's an interesting way to portray a film, portray a character, portray the impact of just something terrible happening to someone and watching their growth throughout. It worked really well. And honestly, I'm just excited to see him in more films. He actually did another film last year that I know some of our other friends like. It's called Mogul Mowgli. Maybe I'm mispronouncing that, but that
I
also
remember
came out in
seeing that
2020.
one.
Interesting.
So he's got stuff.
Well, I think
Yeah.
before we dive into the specifics here, there's just a little overview of the plot. Riz Ahmed plays Ruben, a metal drummer who, in the first couple of minutes of the film, loses his hearing nearly completely, and then goes through the stages of figuring out what to do once his hearing is completely gone. And so, I mean, just for me to start out, that first scene where we watch and we listen, they're hands-on and they're very creative in the sound design here. They shift between showing you what it sounds like normally in a scene, what the sounds are as captured by microphones, to switching what it sounds like for Ruben. And while I think that can be interpreted as very on the nose, it really works for the benefit of the film here. It's exactly what's
on the nose. I mean,
it's
I
exactly
don't see
what's
how
needed.
They would have done it any other way.
Yeah, and so and there's transitions between drumming and it just like fades out, and I think I really want to learn more about this. I want to know about the sound design research process. I mean, just from someone who really likes this kind of stuff, I can't imagine how much fun this would have been, because I got the impression that they had figured out what it would sound like. You can't just be creative and make something up. I think there's real research, and they must have done real, talk to people who have gone partially and completely deaf, and figure out, later on when he gets the implants, what those sound like.
Sure.
And like
there was a. Yeah. Oh yeah. Sorry, you can finish your point, but I do have a bit of trivia.
Okay. Well, it's just like all of this very conscious choice to use sound as, I think, the primary emotional and storytelling method across the film. The story happens, but it is driven by when we can hear Ruben and when we can't hear what he's hearing. And it comes, it comes and goes. I think it's well placed. There's some scenes where you don't hear it, and there's others where you do hear as him. And each time you hear as him, and it's like a total, it's like a wake up call. I mean, I try to be careful with my hearing. I try not to blast the headphones, and yet I am aware that in his situation, if I lose my hearing, I mean, I guess I don't know what I'll lose the thing I love. So. I mean, just like personal, we talk about in other episodes of Quest, the personal connection, for me, it's really there.
Yeah. In preparation for this film, I don't know if you'd call this pre-production or not, but Darius Marder, first time director of this, by the way, is his directorial debut.
Wow, what a
That's true. I'm serious. I don't think that's true.
Okay, well, continue. Tucker will fact check this.
He directed Loot in 2008.
What is that?
Movie.
Okay, great. Has anyone seen it? Anyway,
we can say he's relatively new, at least.
Yeah, this is, I mean, for a second movie, at the very least.
Same with Judas and Black Messiah.
True, that's also true. Yeah. So Darius Marder and lead sound designer Nicholas Becker did apparently a year and a half of preparation on studying and researching what the hearing loss actually sounds like, the various aspects of it, the implants like Timo brought up, what that actually all sounds like, and then having to figure out how to recreate that artificially.
Yeah, I buy that completely. I mean, that's incredible dedication. And it works. I think it really pays off.
Yeah, I agree.
I think what's so effective about this film is that, for me, that's not even why it's so special. It's really incredible work from a sound perspective. It's an excellent gimmick for the film, but I don't even think that's the heart. I think a lot of it is how Riz Ahmed deals with this and deals with trying to recapture what he had and finding this new life, and then throwing it away for a shot that he doesn't even get in the end, recognizing that what he found is at least bringing him a little bit of peace. Yeah. I think that this film succeeds beyond being gimmicky because it's a really emotional and very personal story that's very relatable and universal, but told in such a unique way.
I think for me, the reason the film works so well is I was going into it expecting the story to be mostly at the beginning, like a first act of him having his hearing, getting us introduced to the character. He's going on a tour, playing drums constantly. We get a bunch of heavy metal concerts. But the story is not that. The story is instantly him losing his hearing and learn to be deaf. And that's really what we watch for the majority of the film. And that subverted my expectations in a way. I'm like, oh, this is a lot more compelling of a story concept from a structure format than I was expecting. And I just have to say, as someone who is not particularly, I don't have an affinity for sound, but I do have really bad tinnitus. And this movie does not help my tinnitus with all the screeches and all the beeps and bloops of listening through the hearing loss. I sit in bed at night and I hear high-pitched ringing constantly. And I'm worried about my hearing. I don't blast loud music. I don't go to concerts. I have no idea why I have tinnitus. But it's interesting to hear something that mimics something that I experience every moment of every day. And of course, that's hearing loss. I hear too much sound, but I don't know. It's just another personal connection that I can draw to it.
Yeah, I think Abram brings up a really good point about the sound design not being a gimmick because it's rooted in Riz Ahmed's performance, and his character is just something that is another marvel of this film, and how well his character is portrayed. Well, they don't dish it out to you in front of your face. That you have to pick it up from context clues about him being clean for 4 years and him and his girlfriend Lou being together for 4 years. Just the ways, like as he's experiencing life in the deaf community, and you look back and you understand what his character is. You're like, oh, that's why he gets up early. He makes breakfast. He puts on the music. He gets his girlfriend up. This is a man. This is a guy. This is a character who is dedicated, he's driven, he does everything in his own way. And when he starts to lose his hearing, you see that when he starts to lose his hearing, he's being an asshole, essentially. He's being maybe the biggest asshole you could be in that situation. He's like, no, we got to keep going, we got to keep on the tour. And you get that he's dedicated, but it's also because he's just so driven to take care of himself, his surroundings, and everyone in his life. And the way that character is fleshed out and developed in this story is really amazing.
We talk a lot for a long time, BLB fans, about subtleism on this program. And that's really true in the way that this film is written and constructed. The ways that you understand that he was an addict and a user without ever seeing him do drugs. And the way that his charisma is clearly somebody trying to get drugs, and now that's manifesting somewhere else, and everything he does is informed by a past and the character that he knows and that the audience is given access to, but you're not hit over the head with it. Right. The film is very good about very earnestly and organically giving out information as you need it without you feeling lost or without it feeling too vague. I really love that. I love the way that he's characterized, and I think that subtlety extends to Riz Ahmed's performance, who doesn't even have to say anything to convey a lot. His facial acting is incredible. His body language is incredible. We were talking last time, in the Judas review, about maybe one of these guys should have been up for Best Actor, but no, because nobody, I don't think, having not seen everything, nobody's beating Riz Ahmed because he deserves an award for this performance. I think it's incredible.
I'd say if Chadwick Boseman were not up for it this year, Riz Ahmed would be far and away the winner.
That's a great point. I forgot about that.
This film is for a film about hearing loss and whatever, and a lot about the deaf community, it is very sparse in the dialogue, but even in our fully hearing scenes, in our scenes where our characters are talking to each other, it is very sparse, and a lot of it is communicated through slight glances and through body language and all that kind of nonverbal acting. And then it gets heightened when he has to learn how to be deaf. And I think that really works very well. And it's anytime you can, as a director and as an actor, as you can pull those kind of performances out of your characters, that's something to be celebrated. And because it's just hard. It's hard to get that kind of stuff to read as well as it does in this film.
Yeah.
One other thing that I think is interesting is we're talking about his personality and how he gets up in the morning. He's a very driven person, but I think it also ties into the underlying theme of the movie, which is addiction. And not only is it addiction to drugs, which he has gotten over, but still sometimes feels the craving for, but his addiction to the life that he led, that high octane drummer life that he really wants to get back to. He can't imagine changing his life to do something else, and he will do anything to get back on that track. even if it doesn't end up working out for him, even if it messes with the lives or the wants of people around him. And it's also just interesting to see not only a deaf community, but a deaf addict community. Like there's so many intersecting and unique concepts here that you don't see tackled in many films that I think make this so compelling. You have him being an addict, you have him going into the deaf community, you have him being a drummer who's losing his hearing, you have the fact that he's losing his hearing, which you don't see in movies very often. And just there's just so much to this that I found myself just compelled all the way through, because I couldn't wait to see what was happening next, because there's so many unique concepts.
I felt like this film, having dealing with all these heavy, weighty subjects that need to, there are certain ways that deaf people act and that want to be portrayed. And this film was very sensitive in the way that it tackles that. It deals with the idea that deaf communities are proud of their deafness, and that's and that's a lot of who they are, and the idea that it's not something to be fixed and it's not a disability, and that they'll come together under that guise. It's a major plot point in the film, but it's still something that needs to be said when you're talking about all this stuff, because we're all hearing people, and so it's second nature to us. And for the first while, if I were to go deaf, I would probably think of it as a disability. And yet that's not how the community wants to be treated and wants to be represented, which is this film does very well in being very equitable and very sensitive to those matters.
Yeah. If we want to talk about the deaf community more, I think we should talk about Paul Raci as Joe, who's a very strong contender for Best Supporting Actor this year from all things I've heard. I think he is very much a supporting actor because, as we've said, this film is very, very, very central to Riz Ahmed. But even in the scene that they give him, I can just see it now. Paul Raci wins the Oscar. He's walking up the stage, and they throw up this scene when he's kicking Ruben out of the house for undergoing the treatment. That's the scene that they're going to throw up for if he wins this Oscar, because that is a great single scene performance from him.
It was incredibly powerful.
you have to see him fighting his own care for Ruben, because he genuinely does care about Ruben. He goes out of his way to help him to figure out a special routine for Ruben to overcome not his deafness, mind you, but his addiction. His addiction, not to drugs or anything, but the thing we talked about, his addiction to being active and having to do something all the time. And you see him fighting that care for Ruben, and also fighting for the care for this community who he thinks shouldn't view deafness as a disability. And he has no choice but to kick Ruben out of this community.
I really love the character of Joe, and I love the relationship that he has with Ruben and what he pulls out of this film, because I love, much like Ruben, how subtly we learn about Joe, and how we learn that he and Ruben are very similar in what they've faced and where they're going. And I think this idea of, he says something like finding the kingdom of God in the stillness. I think there's something really powerful and really applicable, especially when, even outside of Ruben's addiction and his vices and everything, he can't stop working. He has to fix the eaves. He has to fix anything. And I'm pretty sure, at least I can, I'm pretty sure a lot of people can relate to that theme and this idea of trying to find a stillness. I think that's so powerful. And I think the way that it comes to a head in that final sequence when Ruben takes his hearing aids back off, it's really great. And it pays off the importance that Joe had, even if Ruben couldn't really show it. The impact Joe is able to have on the film narratively and thematically and on the audience with so few scenes is really incredible.
Yeah.
I got to bring something up, guys. This is my major criticism of the movie. We haven't done any criticizing of this movie, but I do think there are a couple aspects that I find to be not major flaws, but ones that certainly did hamper my overall enjoyment. And I think that the supporting cast, while their good performances, are not fleshed out enough. I think that Joe is the strongest one, but he's kind of really the only one. Even his girlfriend Lulu leaves for the majority of the film, which makes sense in the context, but you don't really get a ton about her, and the little tickles you get of her personality don't really play too much into the plot. There's a whole deaf community around him. You've got surprise Lauren Ridloff showing up as the teacher who didn't really get any personal growth or personality. He has a friend who just shows up. and it helps him sell this stuff, but we don't know their name. Like I feel like there's such a focus on Ruben's character that it does leave behind the people around him. And I really think that could have fleshed out the world a little more. It could have been given us a little more interesting perspectives on the situation if we were able to learn more about those characters. And I just found myself confused when he was interacting with people because it's like, oh, well, we don't really know anything about them. We don't really know what's going on. So it just feels a little bit empty.
I felt like because the film had decided to be so centered around Ruben's character that it wasn't, and it was very obvious to me that while, yeah, I didn't, get a huge amount of detail from the other characters, I felt like because I cared so much for Ruben and to see what was happening to him, that everyone was literally there just to support him as a plot, from plot wise. And so while I agree that that they didn't have a huge amount of detail in their characters, it doesn't necessarily present a huge issue to me as I watch.
I would say that the reason I think I'm focusing so heavily on that when I consider this film is that a lot of the impact that he has as a character is on those around him. You have to feel for him and be against him in some situations because he's leaving behind people, because he's not listening, because he's so stuck in his addiction that he in moments doesn't care about those around him. And if we had gotten more development for those characters, I think it would have felt like a bigger impact when he does sell his thing or has to abandon the community, or he shows up and he teaches the kids. If we'd gotten more connection with the kids, like the fact that he had to leave, that would have felt a little more impactful. But I don't know. I think it's not a huge deal, but I think it's definitely something that needs to be commented on.
So I disagree. I think it depends on who you're talking about. For instance, I think Lulu is very well spelled out insofar as she needs to be for the narrative. The ways that you learn about not only her past through her father, which is a little bit expository and weird, I would say, but the relationship she has with Ruben and how that informs her mental health and how they both play off of each other, and her leaving him and finding a much brighter future in the absence of the cutting and with a much more healthier sound to her music. You get a lot out of Lulu. I think it's important. I think it is important to like Timo was saying, realize that this film is contextualized around Ruben. And what you learn in the margins, I think, is very useful for Joe, for Lulu. I got an excellent sense of those characters. And what I think is effective about the deaf community and why that hits so much when he leaves is because you do start to get those threads of supporting characterization with the teacher. You can see they like sharing glances. The kid that he plays the drums with on the slide, which is an excellent sequence. You see him developing these things with the girl he makes a tattoo for. You get these, but then Ruben leaves, right? And I think that's powerful, that when you're on the cusp of knowing these characters who are opening up to him as he's kind of opening up to them, he taps out and he recognizes at the end the mistake in that. But I don't think, and because of that, because it's so, I think, pointed, I don't view it as a criticism of the film, especially when I feel like there is more to Joe and Lulu than I think you're letting on.
Yeah,
So,
I think Abram used a great term there, in the margins, because Ruben is essentially between two worlds this entire film. That's his character arc, is having to cross over from one into the other. And he's interacting with people who are in the margins of his life in either of those worlds. And the audience is in that same thing with him. I think something that this film does very well is immersion. I think that is this is a capital I immersive film, primarily through the use of sound design, but also in Riz Ahmed's performance. And we are yearning for that familiar sound, that feeling of familiarity, that the same way that Ruben is. He wants to get back to his regular life. But I think a really heart-wrenching scene in this is when he gets his hearing aids.
I was waiting to talk about this scene.
I have to sell my RV. I have to. Lulu's she's in France doing another thing. I have 8 weeks to get this money together to buy back our RV so we can get back on tour and everything can go back to normal. But first, I have to get these hearing aids. They go to the surgery and he's completely deaf for 3 weeks. And he sits down. And the first time that they click on, he's like, "Oh no, that doesn't sound right." She's like, "Oh, we'll make an adjustment." She's like, "Oh, okay, good. We're gonna make an adjustment." And then she makes an adjustment, and he's like, "That still doesn't sound right. Can you adjust it again?" And she's like, "Well, what's happening here is that your ears still don't work. It's just the implants tricking your brain into thinking that you are hearing.
Yeah.
And the facial acting, the subtleism that we love talking about here,
And just
in
the
Riz
sound
Ahmed's
design. We
performance,
gotta,
and the sound design, of course, is really what it grabs your heart and it just stomps on it, because that is you feel his pain in that scene. He's like, oh, this is it. This is what I've been fighting for this entire time. And he's like, well, I guess I got to keep going. This is, and that's because his character arc isn't completely finished, but it nearly is. And I think that scene is just immensely powerful.
I mean, just to talk about the sound and how it totally sells all of that. I mean, you heard it as well as I did. It sounds horrible. It sounds just awful. I mean, I can't imagine going the rest of, living with that as what I hear. So, I mean, the acting and everything is just all complemented by this, like, truly, I think, an excellent achievement in sound design where they sell the emotion and they sell it just by, like, I mean, it's horrifying. It's like, I don't really have a good way to describe it other than I'm just like a grating. It has, I mean, it's just like, wow. I really want to find out more about how they did the sound process for this film, just because it was so excellent and because it's so motivated. It's excellently motivated within the story.
I think what's so great about that sequence as to the context of just the scene is the dread it puts, I think, in me as an audience member, especially when you get to where Lulu is singing with her father and that the sound is going to flip. But they switch, but they hang on it. You don't get the flipped what Ruben's hearing for a while, and that really hurts because you know what he's going to hear when it changes.
Well, he's lying other times when he says that he's all good, because he's not. He's not hearing how he wants to be hearing. And it's just heartbreaking. And then when he says, "Oh, you sang beautifully. I thought you were real," it's like, he's like, you don't know that. Like we heard what you heard, and it didn't sound like anything. And it really hurts.
One other thing I have to comment in this sort of ending section, that where he does have his implants and we are cutting back between, actual sound like we hear it and the way that the implants are tricking his brain into hearing it, is you get a lot of sequences of him being just existing in the world and listening to it through his implants, and it's horrifying. It's terrible. Everything sounds garbled. Yeah, and really just obnoxious. But we don't ever get a sequence of him listening to metal music like that, and you just have to infer of how terrible that would be. Because if a crowded party sounds like that to him, imagine what drums sound like. Imagine what a screaming crowd at a concert sounds like. And I like that they're restrained in that, and it doesn't actually tie back to the metal concepts at the beginning, because it allows you to infer that, because he's thinking that in his head the whole time. He's like, well, shit, we can't go back on tour because I can't listen to it like that. And you never get that moment, but you can infer it. And I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, I think he's lying, like Timo said, and that's really where his character arc concludes. He's like, I gotta give up on the hearing aids. I gotta give up on this journey that I've set myself on. I really truly have to live with this now. And he's like, I can't continue to lie about everything I hear, how it sounds amazing. I can't go back to heavy metal drumming. And that's where he sits down on that park bench and he takes off his hearing aids.
Well, it's the bell. Those bells sound, and they're just like this is it.
I can't do this. This
film was a joy to listen to. I have some pretty hi-fi setup here, so I've got good headphones, good sound system, and that was just like, I wanted to take my headphones off. And then he did, and I was like, oh my god, I was like,
well, I think we should.
On that park bench. Oh, sorry. I just want to wrap. He sits down on the park bench and he takes off his hearing aids, and you can see the peace just wash over his face, where he's like, all right, this is it now. I finally figured it out. He's sitting just like Joe told him to, by the way. He's sitting and he found peace in that stillness and in the silence.
Yes, I think there's two moments at the end of the film that really hit. That one, I think, is empowering. I think that's one of the few empowering moments of the film.
Sure.
Then right before it is the one where they really take the wind out of you, when Lulu comes back to bed and they start talking and she starts scratching her arm and he just says it's okay, and they hug and it cuts away.
Mhm.
That's an incredibly powerful scene. And I think that perfectly encapsulates how much nuance there is in this film. How much they're able to communicate just with her body language and him saying it's okay, and them both recognizing what that means and not saying it, and the audience understanding. It really leaves this just knot in you that is loosened a little bit by the scene with him finding the piece of taking the hearing aids out. But this film really grabbed me, I think, emotionally, and I think that's probably behind this the technical achievement. I think that's really why I love the movie so much.
Yeah.
I want to say that I think that there are other empowering moments in the film. I think that a lot of the film is actually empowering in certain ways. I think under the obvious tones of dealing with hearing loss, it's also about dealing with addiction and the community that helps one overcome the addiction. And I think that basically everything we see with him growing as a person by being a part of the deaf community is very empowering. The sequence of him banging on the slide, like you were saying, because that's just him making a small connection. You have him teaching the kids to drum with the sticks on the buckets and also playing with them out in a field. He's rebuilding that human connection. And I think through all of those and him learning to sign and having a dinner at the table where he's signing and able to laugh at a signed joke, even though those all went over his head earlier in the film. I think all of that is really quietly empowering. It's not the in your face is not the right word, but overt empowerment of the end of the film that concludes his arc, but the cycle that repeats and the empowerment that he feels within himself to become a more realized person.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I think the reason I didn't initially register those as empowering, because those are all great and emotional sequences, is that when things are going well for Ruben, I checked the runtime and there was 55 minutes left. And like the air just left me, because I knew that's not the end of Ruben's story. I thought to myself, I want another hour of Ruben finding acceptance, but that's not this film. Which is it's powerful. It's really well done.
I will note that I sort of felt like it dragged a little bit in the middle for about a half hour there in the middle of the second act. Not horrible. Didn't drag my attention away. Didn't make me want to do anything else. But it did feel a little slow. Nothing that I'm going to really complain about more than just mentioning it as a note, because I think so much of this film is excellent. We haven't talked about cinematography. I thought it was really beautiful. I thought it was really beautifully shot. Yeah. This film isn't really about the visuals beyond like capturing the performance, but I still thought that there were some, had nice trend, just beautiful. I think it was shot on film. It looked like it was shot on film. Had nice color, nice composition. It didn't
feel lacking in any way. It didn't feel like, oh, we'll go hard in the sound department and we'll kind of just the cinematography. It didn't feel like that at all.
Yeah. That shot where he the one last time is playing the drums in the RV, and it cuts out of the RV, and it's just like the sun is setting and everything's silhouetted and he's still playing. That's gorgeous. I think there's a lot of energy in that opening sequence when it's cutting between him and Lulu, and he's just going nuts on his kit. I do think it's a very stylishly pretty film.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of shots where I found myself just not overtly like, oh, I like the framing of this, I like the set design, but just visually appealing. I think this movie has a great color palette, which is something that I don't think a lot of people are going to talk about. But I think that everything's kind of soft, but there are rich colors in places. Like when they're in the diner at the beginning, there's the red of the seats behind them, and I think that just there are certain moments where it really caught me. And I especially just one random shot I really liked. When he steps out of the RV for the first time in the film, and I think at that point he had started to lose his hearing, but it's just this really wide shot of a parking lot, and the RV being the only thing in that parking lot, like a bowling alley or something behind them. But it sets up a lot in that they are alone, they're together, they live in this RV, there's nothing around them.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that simple shot, which is already a visually great shot, also really works thematically, and I thought that was really strong because of that.
Yeah,
that actually takes me to my one slight negative of the film. Is this idea of them being together and being the band. I think it's powerful that we see so little of that, but I would have wanted a little bit more because
Sure.
for part of the film, I didn't understand. Are they an indie band? Are they well off? It becomes clear the more you watch the film, the scope of their
Popularity.
fame.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think I would have liked a little bit more to better understand why. Of course, we understand why the band is so important to Ruben, but what importance does this have to other people? Does he have a net he can fall back into a little bit? Is there a fandom behind him? And you get teases of that, like when he checks the website. But I think even if the film had spent 10 more minutes, with them at their height before the hearing loss, I might have just understood a little bit better his pre-death life.
Sure.
Yeah, they jump into it so quickly that it ends up feeling like a little bit jarring, which of course it is for him, but there's not a lot, not any setup at the beginning for who he was, and then you really follow him only through when he's lost his hearing, which is an interesting choice. But I do agree. I think that also would have given you a little more context for who he is, and seeing the scope of what he's been doing with this band. I think that would have been pretty interesting.
Yeah, but I think it's still very good with the story that we're given, and we can say, oh, I would have liked if they did this, but I think it's still incredibly well made with what we are given.
Yeah. So with that, you have anything else you want to say, or do we want to give a little ranking? You don't need to send it to me. I mean, we got 1 or 2.
Oh,
that is our choice right now.
Binary option.
Yeah. You want to just go around the round table? Abram says 1. Tanner, what do you say? Tanner says 1. Tucker?
I won.
I got a good 2.
And I got to go. I got to go 2 as well on that one.
Oh wait, hang on a second. Wait, how does that work?
Okay, all right.
Well,
all right.
it's a little
now
bit
we
tough.
have a discussion.
Now we get to do something fun.
Okay, I think
talk
that,
to each other.
Yeah, which we haven't been doing this entire time. I think that this film does something more immersive than Judas and the Black Messiah does. Judas and the Black Messiah is a very well-made biopic that displays some very important topics, has some great performances, but at the end of the day, I don't think it does anything super duper out of the box. And Sound of Metal, I think, does in its sound design. I think it's such a centralized, focused character study that it's amazing in that respect. Judas and the Black Messiah it splits that in 2. And while both characters are very strong in Judas, it just isn't as focused and it just isn't as focused as Sound of Metal.
I think if I can jump off of that, I agree in large part, and some of this is subjective, but I find that if we're talking about an Oscar, we're talking about Best Picture, I think you need to look at artistic ambition and achievement. And I think that this is a more ambitious film that achieves more than Judas and the Black Messiah. Of course, that's an incredibly important and resonant story, both historically and contemporarily. But I think what's so powerful about this straight fictionalized narrative we have here is how much it is able to achieve with so little, the amount it's able to say so subtly, what it pushes the envelope of in terms of both storytelling and technical element. I think this film does more and accomplishes more. That doesn't take away from the style or the resonance of Judas, but I think it just shows how, I think, masterful the Sound of Metal is, and how it's able to subvert your expectations, both just as a viewer of film, what you expect out of diegetic sound, but also out of your expectation just of a kind of more Oscar bait drama character study. I think there is so much going on here that propels it higher than Judas, which is an incredibly well-made and important standard historical drama. I just think there's more here.
Sure. I agree.
You might be swaying me, because I'm seeing the idea of the subtle themes, and how the themes in this film are not overt. You got to think about them. But once you think about them, I think it has a lot to say, and it has a lot of interesting, it's varied. And the idea that while it's about, hearing loss, which is, you can have that as your central theme. It's really about addiction. And this idea of multi-layered storytelling with multi-layered meaning does maybe convince me that it should be at number 1 right now.
Yeah.
So,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I'm put in an interesting position here. I think the reason I came into this, putting it one below, still we're comparing the best of the year here, so there's no criticism either way. But I think I came into it thinking more of how I came out of Judas and the Black Messiah, realizing that I had seen something that was educational, emotionally impactful, included a lot of fantastic performances, a lot of developed characters, was all historically accurate. I was really blown away by how it was able to tell that story compellingly. But through the things you guys have said and through my personal reflection of this whole discussion on what I thought about the film coming off of it, Sound of Metal, that is, I think I'm also going to go up to number one. If that could puts us at a unanimous, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But I think you're right in the fact that not only is this film more artistically creative, it's an original screenplay that I think does the best of what original screenplays can do. It's also just important in terms of putting a deaf movie essentially in the mainstream and having so much of it be using sign language and silent and having that adaptation to telling this really unique story that we don't get, and having it receiving so many accolades. I think that's really important. And yeah, I mean, looking back, Judas and the Black Messiah is a biopic. It is a historical movie, and we have our complaints about the fact that so many of those get nominated and win Best Picture. So again, for our ranking, might as well give something super original the bump.
Yeah, I'd say so. And keep in mind, we're comparing, for me at least, I'm comparing.
These are both great movies.
I'm comparing a 9 to a 10 here. So,
well, you gave this a 10?
I gave it a 10, 5 stars.
There you go. That's very, very interesting. We have it settled. A unanimous decision to put Sound of Metal at first place out of 2.
Yeah,
we will see what happens next time. And so I'm curious, Monsieur Tanner, you are our schedule master. What are we gonna have? What are we gonna have up next on the docket?
I believe the next one we are reviewing, the next 2, I should say, because we can do these in any order because we're excellent planners, by the way, are The Father and Minari.
Great. Excited for both.
Yes.
Yes.
So one of those will be up on Wednesday and one of those will be up on Friday.
Awesome. So we're doing The Father next. That's what we're doing next.
Let's just do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is the one that we're having a little trouble getting because it's just barely coming onto VOD now as we record.
On Friday.
Okay. Well,
so then we'll have to do Minari first.
Okay. Or we can do we'll figure it out. Don't worry about audience.
This is off-camera stuff. What to do? This is not on-camera stuff to figure out. You'll get 2 film reviews next week, and it's going to be those 2 films in one order or the other.
Yep.
Yes.
True.
Subscribe, hit the bell. You'll figure it out. Don't worry.
You'll figure it out. You're smart.
Keep you on your toes.
You're smart. You're watching Backlog Banter, so you are a smart individual.
Of course.
Are you a smart feller or a fart smeller?
That's the real question.
Week. That is find out next week on the quest for the Best Picture nominees of 2021. We're going to be talking about one of those 2 movies once we figure it out right after this. So thank you for joining me. Good discussion. Great movie. And I can't wait to talk about more of these. All right. Peace.
So long.